Welcome to our deep dive on the history of space exploration.
Excited to be here.
We've got a ton of material to get through,
Yeah, a lot to cover.
from the earliest ideas about space travel
Uh,
to,
hmm,
the cutting edge missions happening right now.
absolutely.
But one thing that really jumped out at me
Okay.
was just how long people have been dreaming about space.
Yeah.
Like, way before the technology was even there.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the early 1900s,
Right.
you have these pioneers.
Like Tsiolkovsky?
Yeah, Tsiolkovsky,
Leonard?
Goddard, and Oberth.
Oberth? Yeah.
These guys were writing about spaceflight when it was still practically science fiction.
I mean, it sounds crazy.
Right.
But they weren't just, daydreaming. They were figuring out the actual scientific principles.
That would eventually make it all possible.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And then to think,
hmm
Goddard launched the first liquid-fueled rocket in 1926.
It's incredible to think about that.
That must have been wild to see. Oh, absolutely.
Like, what do you think that moment represented?
It was a huge step.
Yeah.
Like, it proved that you could actually break free of Earth's atmosphere. It wasn't just theory anymore.
Yeah.
And I think it really set the stage for everything that followed.
It's interesting, though, how all this early work
Yeah.
sort of collided with world events.
Mm-hmm.
A few decades later, you have the Cold War,
Yeah.
and suddenly space becomes this,
Arena for competition.
exactly.
Yeah. Then Sputnik happens,
Sputnik in 1957.
launched by the Soviets
First artificial satellite.
to orbit Earth.
It really shook things up in the U.S.
Totally changed the game,
Yeah, it was a good wake-up call.
for sure.
And then just a month later,
Sputnik 2.
with Lelka the dog.
Yeah.
That one's kind of tough to talk about.
Yeah, it's complicated.
I mean, it was a huge leap forward
Oh, definitely.
in terms of understanding how living things react to spaceflight.
Right.
But it also raised a lot of ethical questions.
Oh, absolutely. About how far we should push things.
I mean, those questions are still relevant today.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a reminder that progress isn't always straightforward.
And that we have to be careful.
Yeah.
And then in 1961,
Yuri Gagarin.
first human to orbit Earth.
Incredible.
I can't even imagine what that must have been like.
For him and for the whole world watching.
What a moment.
Yeah, it was huge for the Soviet Union.
In terms of,
Demonstrating their capabilities.
showing everyone what they could do
And it put even more pressure on the U.S.
to keep up.
Absolutely.
And then, of course,
Kennedy's speech.
that challenge to land on the moon before the end of the decade.
What a bold move.
I mean, they barely had the technology figured out,
It was a huge undertaking.
but it really captured the imagination of the
It
country.
inspired a whole generation.
From scientists, engineers,
get
and they
further.
pulled it off.
Apollo 11, 1959. Neil Armstrong's one small step.
That image is burned into everyone's memory.
It's iconic.
What an achievement.
It's hard to overstate the impact.
I mean, obviously it was this huge technological triumph,
Yeah.
but I think it also changed how we see ourselves.
Yeah. Those pictures of Earth from space.
That pale blue dot,
Exactly.
it gave us this sense of perspective
Like how fragile our planet is.
and how connected we all are.
Absolutely.
And what's amazing is that the Apollo program didn't stop there.
No, they kept going.
5 more missions to the moon,
Each one building on the last.
pushing the boundaries further and further.
It was an incredible time for space exploration.
Yeah, it really was.
So much progress in such a short time.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing to think they went from those first ideas about space travel to actually walking on the moon.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing.
But it didn't stop there.
Oh, no, definitely not.
So what happened after the Apollo missions were over?
Well, they started thinking about how to stay in space longer.
So like space stations,
Exactly.
like Skylab,
Yeah.
the first American space station.
Launched in 1973.
And then Mir.
The Soviet station in the 80s.
Wow.
Skylab was a huge learning experience.
What do you mean?
Figuring out how to live and work in space for a long time.
Right, because the Apollo missions were pretty short.
Relatively, yeah.
And then Mir was interesting because of its design,
It was modular.
so they could keep adding to it.
Exactly.
And it was also really important for international collaboration,
Yeah, you had astronauts from all over the world working together on Mir,
which leads us to the International Space Station.
the ISS.
It's been continuously inhabited for over 2 decades now.
It's incredible.
All that research happening up there.
It's a testament to what we can achieve when countries work together.
Absolutely.
And it wouldn't have been possible without those earlier stations.
Skylab and Mir.
They showed us that long-duration spaceflight was possible.
And the ISS took it to the next level.
Definitely.
But there's another big development happening at the same time.
The space shuttle.
Yeah, that thing was iconic.
It changed everything.
It made space travel so much more accessible.
More frequent missions.
And it opened up all these new possibilities.
Like what?
Well, they could transport astronauts, obviously,
Yeah,
but also deploy satellites.
right.
They even repaired the Hubble Space Telescope with the shuttle.
Wow.
It was a remarkable piece of engineering.
Of course, there were also those terrible tragedies.
The Challenger and Columbia disasters.
It's a reminder of how dangerous space travel can be.
Yeah, it was a huge loss for the entire space community
But they learned from those accidents.
and made spaceflight safer,
It's important to remember that progress isn't without its risks.
for sure.
So while all this was happening in low Earth orbit,
Mm-hmm.
robotic exploration was taking off.
Further out in the solar system
Yeah, like the Voyager probe.
and the Mars rovers.
It's incredible to think the Voyagers are still sending back data.
After all these years.
They launched in 1977.
And they're still going.
They're in interstellar space now.
It's mind-boggling.
What have we learned from them?
So,
They've given us this incredible view of the outer planets.
Jupiter, Saturn,
Uranus,
yeah,
Neptune.
and their moons.
They showed us how diverse our solar system really is.
And then there are the Mars rovers.
Spirit, opportunity, curiosity.
They're like little celebrities.
They really captured the public's imagination.
What have they discovered?
Evidence of past liquid water on Mars.
So Mars might have been habitable at some point.
Exactly.
They've also analyzed the soil and rocks.
Giving us clues about Mars's history.
And Curiosity is searching for signs of ancient life.
It's incredible what those rovers have accomplished.
It's amazing to think about them driving around on another planet.
I know, it's hard to believe sometimes.
And for most of space exploration history, it's been government agencies leading the way.
Like NASA.
Right.
But recently, things have started to change.
Private companies are getting involved.
Like SpaceX, Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic.
It's a whole new era.
Absolutely.
They're bringing a lot of innovation to the field.
And a lot of ambition.
Like SpaceX with their reusable rockets.
Landing them back on Earth after launch.
It's become almost routine.
It's amazing.
How does that change things?
It makes spaceflight much cheaper.
So it's more accessible.
For everyone.
And these companies have some pretty wild goals.
Yeah, they're thinking big.
Going to Mars.
Building a lunar base.
Space tourism.
It sounds like science fiction.
Do you think it's possible?
The progress has been incredible.
It's hard to say for sure, but
But I wouldn't rule anything out.
we've come so far.
From those early dreamers to where we are now.
It's pretty inspiring.
It really is.
But there are still a lot of challenges ahead.
That's true. Like what? Well, as we go further into space, we need to think about the ethical implications
Right.
and the risks involved.
What are some of the biggest hurdles we need to overcome? Yeah, what are some of the things we need to be thinking about?
Well, one big one is planetary protection
Okay.
as we explore other planets,
Like Mars.
especially places like Mars.
Right, where there might be microbial life.
Yeah. We have to be really careful not to contaminate them.
With stuff from Earth.
Exactly.
Yeah, that would be pretty ironic.
Right.
To discover life on another planet.
Only to find out we brought it there ourselves.
Exactly.
So there are a lot of precautions in place.
Like what?
They sterilize spacecraft really thoroughly.
Before they launch?
Yeah. And they choose landing sites carefully.
To avoid any potential habitats.
Right. It's a big responsibility.
It makes you wonder, though,
Mhm.
what if we do find alien life?
That's a huge question.
How should we interact with it?
It's something scientists and ethicists have been debating for a long time.
What are some of the ideas?
Well, some people believe we should protect any extraterrestrial life.
Like, we protect endangered species.
Exactly.
But wouldn't we also want to study it?
Of course.
Learn from it?
That's natural.
But what if that means disrupting their environment?
It's a tough balance.
Between scientific curiosity,
And the potential impact on alien ecosystems.
it's a lot to consider.
Yeah, it might require us to change how we think about ourselves
As humans,
and our place in the universe.
it's pretty humbling.
It really is.
And then there's the issue of conflict,
Closer to home.
like the militarization of space.
It's a worrying trend.
Countries developing weapons.
And surveillance systems,
It feels like we're turning space into a battleground
which would be a disaster.
for everyone.
What can we do to prevent that?
I don't know, it's tough.
We need international agreements.
Treaties.
Yeah. Clear rules for how to behave in space
Open communication,
to build trust.
so we don't end up fighting over it.
Right.
It's like all the problems we have on Earth.
Are following us into space.
Yeah, and speaking of problems,
Space debris,
all that junk orbiting the planet.
old satellites, pieces of rockets.
It's a mess.
And it's getting worse.
It seems dangerous.
It is. There's a risk of collisions.
And those collisions could create even more debris.
It's a chain reaction.
I've heard about the Kessler syndrome.
Yeah, where a cascade of collisions
Makes space unusable.
It's a scary thought.
What are we doing about it?
Well, there are efforts to develop technology.
To clean up the debris?
Yeah, like capturing it or removing it.
And also designing new spacecraft.
With end-of-life disposal plans?
So they don't just become more junk.
Exactly. We need to be more responsible.
It's kind of like we need a leave no trace policy for space.
I like that analogy.
And as space travel becomes more affordable,
Which it seems to be doing.
how do we make sure everyone benefits?
Not just the wealthy.
Or powerful countries?
It should be a shared endeavor.
For all of humanity.
Absolutely.
It's amazing to think about everything we've talked about.
It's been quite a journey.
From those early dreams of spaceflight,
To landing on the moon,
sending robots to other planets,
and now private companies pushing the boundaries even further.
there have been triumphs and tragedies.
Incredible discoveries,
And daunting challenges.
but it's all part of the story.
It really makes you appreciate what we've accomplished.
As a species,
And it makes you wonder what's next.
the possibilities are endless.
It's an exciting time to be alive.
It really is.
To our listeners out there, what do you think the future holds for space exploration?
What role will humanity play?
Keep looking up.
And keep exploring.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.